At first glance, it was just another busy morning at Atlanta International Airport, families rushing to their gates. Business travelers sipping overpriced coffee, and boarding announcements echoing overhead. But for Colonel Marcus Lee, this wasn't just a trip. It was a mission. He was there to escort the remains of Private First Class Andrew Miller, a 21-year-old soldier who had paid the ultimate price for his country. Draped in an American flag, Andrew's casket waited in silence on the tarmac. Marcus had promised his parents their son would come home with honor. But what happened next shook not just the people in that terminal, but the entire nation. When Colonel Lee approached the airline counter, his military orders and identification in hand, he was met not with respect, but suspicion. A pause, a frown, then the words, "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't board this flight." No explanation, no dignity, just a wall of vague policies and downcast eyes. What began as a silent slight quickly unraveled into something much larger. A crowd gathered, phones came out, and the truth began to surface. This wasn't just a delay. It was discrimination, and for the people who watched it unfold, that moment became a mirror. Because what we tolerate in silence says everything about who we are. This story is about more than an airline. It's about the quiet test of character that shows up when no one thinks the world is watching, and what happens when suddenly it is. It was a Monday morning like any other at O'Hare International Airport. Business travelers rushed to their gates, phones glued to their ears. Children tugged at their parents' hands, dragging stuffed animals and backpacks behind them. Rolling suitcases buzzed over polished tile floors. Among them stood Colonel Marcus Lee, a tall, composed figure in full military dress uniform. Every ribbon and medal on his chest told a story of sacrifice, of service, of battles fought and lives saved. But that morning, Marcus wasn't on a mission for accolades or rank. He was there for something far heavier, to escort the body of Private First Class Evan Mitchell, a 21-year-old soldier who had died in the line of duty. Draped in the American flag, Evan's casket was waiting on the tarmac. Marcus had promised the boy's family, just as he'd once promised every soldier under his command, that no one would be left behind. So when he stepped up to the airline counter and laid down his military ID and official orders, Marcus expected nothing more than a quiet nod and routine boarding instructions. He had done this before. It was never easy, but it was always honored. But then came the pause. The ticket agent, barely glancing up, frowned as she typed. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. Her eyes flicked toward a coworker. Then she leaned in and, with a smile that felt anything but sincere, said words that still echo in Marcus's mind. "I'm sorry, sir, there's a security issue with your ticket. You won't be able to board." At first, Marcus thought it was a mistake, some technical glitch. But as he pressed for answers, the atmosphere changed. The smiles stiffened. The tone turned clipped. He was told it was policy. No explanation, no exception. And while he stood there in silence, watching the line behind him grow, the truth settled in like cold steel. He wasn't just being delayed. He was being denied. What followed would spark a national outcry, pulling in veterans, travelers, and an entire online community that refused to let it slide. Phones came out, live streams began, and as millions of eyes turned to this quiet standoff at Gate 47, one question echoed louder than any public address system. How did we come to a place where a decorated officer, escorting a fallen soldier, can be turned away at the gate, without cause, without respect, without shame? This is not just a story about a soldier. It's a story about a promise, a silence broken, and a country forced to look itself in the mirror. Colonel Marcus Lee didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the counter or demand special treatment. Years of service had taught him to stay calm in the chaos. But inside, a storm was brewing. He looked the ticket agent in the eye. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'm escorting a fallen soldier. Private First Class Evan Mitchell. His body is on the tarmac. I have official military clearance and orders. Everything is in order." But she didn't look up. She didn't respond with compassion. Her voice, when it came, was robotic. "I understand, sir, But we can't override the system. It's just policy. That word again. Marcus had heard it too many times. Policy had been used to justify lost benefits, delayed medical care, and broken promises. But now, it was being used to stop a soldier from bringing another home. And still, he held his ground, not just for Evan, but for every family waiting for closure. Behind him, passengers were beginning to notice. A woman in a red scarf leaned toward her husband. A young man lowered his phone and furrowed his brow. The man in line 2 spots back, a retired Marine in a worn-out baseball cap, stepped forward and asked what everyone else was thinking. Is there a problem with his clearance? Or is this something else? The agent faltered. No, it's not his clearance, sir, we just have protocols. The Marine folded his arms. Yeah, I've been through those protocols. They don't stop a man from fulfilling his duty. And with that, the silence cracked. Phones came out, screens lit up, someone began streaming live, another typed furiously on Twitter. Whispers turned to questions, questions to outrage. This man is escorting a fallen soldier. Why is he being turned away? I'm live now, people need to see this. By the time a supervisor emerged, the mood had shifted. What started as a quiet moment at the counter had become a gathering storm. The crowd wasn't angry, not yet, but they were alert, awake, and they weren't looking away. The supervisor's words were rehearsed. We're sorry for the miscommunication, an error in the system. We're working to fix it. But no one was buying it. Not the Marine, not the woman recording from row 6, not the child holding his father's hand and whispering, "Is he a hero?" Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, letting their words echo through the terminal. But deep down, he wondered, what if no one had spoken up? What if he hadn't worn the uniform? Would anyone care? What happened next proved that people did care. And that once the truth is seen, it can't be unseen. Because what began as a quiet denial, it was about to become a national reckoning. It started with a whisper, but it spread like wildfire. By the time Colonel Marcus Hale took one step back from the airline counter, the story had already escaped the confines of Gate C-24. It was no longer just about a delayed flight. It had become something else, something much bigger. The tweet was short, just 16 words, typed out by a college student in a hoodie who had witnessed the entire ordeal. They just denied a U.S. Army colonel escorting a fallen soldier. This is how we treat our heroes. He didn't have many followers, just a few hundred, but within minutes, the post was shared by a veteran advocacy group, then by a journalist, then by a congresswoman, and then, by America. Phones buzzed, screens lit up, the hashtag Let Him Fly began trending. First regionally, then nationally. Within the hour, it reached over 1 million impressions. In the terminal, passengers who had stayed silent were now refreshing their screens in disbelief. One woman gasped softly, whispering to her husband, "It's already on Facebook." Another turned her phone to the crowd and said, "Guys, he's on Twitter." The video has over 40,000 views. The airline staff behind the counter looked frozen. The supervisor who once exuded control now shifted awkwardly under the weight of 1,000 digital eyes. The original agent quietly stepped away, retreating behind a frosted glass door. Her expression pale. People weren't just angry, they were heartbroken. And that was far more dangerous. "I served 2 tours. One man tweeted, 'This makes me sick to my stomach.' A popular news outlet posted a headline that pulled no punches. Army colonel denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier. Airline remained silent. Outside the terminal, the noise grew louder. Protesters began forming outside the airline's regional office. Veterans organizations drafted open letters demanding accountability. A retired general posted, "Our soldiers give everything. The least we can give is respect." Back inside the terminal, a baby cried, a teen live streamed, and somewhere near the back, a man muttered, "They have no idea the storm they just started." Colonel Hale didn't ask for any of it. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded special treatment. All he had asked for was to do his duty. The young woman who had started recording earlier approached again. "Sir," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "People across the country are watching this. What would you like them to know?" Marcus paused. The noise around him seemed to fade. He adjusted his uniform and said calmly, "This isn't about me. It's about the young man in the casket, Private First Class Evan Mitchell. And about the promise we make as a nation to never leave anyone behind. We don't honor our heroes with hashtags, we honor them with dignity." The video went viral in under 10 minutes. And by then, it was far too late for the airline to hide behind policy. The airline supervisor finally returned, but he wasn't alone. Striding beside him was a man in a perfectly pressed navy suit. A corporate badge clipped neatly to his chest. His expression was tight, his gait purposeful, like someone used to putting out fires while pretending the room wasn't already engulfed in flames. He approached Colonel Marcus Hale and extended a hand with forced courtesy. "Colonel, we sincerely apologize for the miscommunication. There seems to have been an error in the system. We're correcting it now and we'll get you on the next flight, first class, of course." Marcus didn't shake the man's hand. He simply looked him in the eye and asked one simple question. "If no one was recording, would I still be standing here?" The man hesitated, just long enough for the crowd to understand the answer. A murmur rippled through the terminal. The young woman filming shifted her phone slightly. The Marine from earlier crossed his arms. His jaw set. The damage was already done, and a polished apology wouldn't erase the stain now etched in public memory. "This isn't about upgrades," Marcus continued, voice steady. "It's about respect. It's about how we treat those who've sacrificed everything. I'm not here to be accommodated. I'm here to bring a soldier home." Silence fell again, the kind that demanded reflection. Then, unexpectedly, airport security stepped forward. A younger officer handed the corporate representative his phone and whispered, "You need to see this." The man's eyes scanned the screen. His face drained of color. It was a news alert. National headline, video attached. Black Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier, airline under fire. The airline hadn't just made a mistake. They had made the mistake, one the nation wouldn't forget. Before anyone else could speak, another figure emerged from the crowd. This one carried the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to explain his presence. Military issue boots, confident posture, a badge that said far more than words ever could. "Colonel Lee," he said with crisp respect. "I'm Major Thomas Beckett, Department of the Army. We've been notified. Your escort mission is no longer under commercial jurisdiction. The Pentagon has arranged a private military flight. Your transport awaits." Marcus nodded, jaw tight. He didn't need to say, "Thank you." In the military, this was simply what you did. You showed up. You handled the mission. You honored the fallen. The airline representative stammered, "Sir, if we could still issue a public clarification." Beckett cut in smoothly. "You'll have plenty of time for statements. Right now, the Army is taking over." Phones captured every word, every face, every silent consequence. As Marcus turned to leave, the Marine offered a small salute. Marcus returned it, not as a gesture of rank, but of shared sacrifice. And then, without pomp, without applause, just with dignity, he walked out, not toward a gate, but toward a promise kept. Marcus Lee didn't walk toward applause. He walked toward duty, and the country walked with him. As he stepped onto the tarmac, the early morning light reflected off the flag-draped casket of Private First Class Evan Mitchell. The air was quiet, reverent. A salute was offered, one returned, and without ceremony or spotlight, a fallen soldier was finally on his way home, escorted not just by a colonel in uniform, but by the weight of a nation's belated awareness. Back inside the terminal, however, the story was just beginning to ripple outward. Within hours, major news outlets had picked up the footage. Headlines blazed across every platform. Airline refuses Army colonel on escort duty. Public outrage erupts. Denied dignity. America reacts to humiliation of a soldier. Veterans groups issued statements. Civil rights advocates called for accountability. And every day, citizens, teachers, truck drivers, single moms, and business owners shared the video with one unified message. This is not who we want to be. By day's end, The airline's CEO appeared in a brief press conference, attempting damage control. There were familiar phrases: regrettable misunderstanding, internal investigation, employee training, but it rang hollow, because the nation had seen something deeper than a PR issue. They had seen a mirror. And in that reflection, a sobering question: how often do we allow dignity to be conditional? The fallout was swift. Stocks dipped. Boycott hashtags trended. Military families vowed to choose other carriers. A lawsuit was filed by a coalition of veteran organizations, citing systemic discrimination and emotional harm. Congress members requested hearings on how airlines handle service members. But for Marcus, it was never about retribution. He stood days later at Evan Mitchell's burial site, just a few feet from the grieving family. He folded the flag and presented it with a bowed head, whispering words not meant for cameras. Later, when asked why he didn't speak out sooner, Marcus replied simply, "Sometimes the uniform we wear protects others. Sometimes it must protect itself." His grace spoke louder than any press release ever could. And what lingered most from that day wasn't the mistake, but the moment people chose not to let it slide. The young woman who streamed live. The Marine who spoke up. The passengers who refused to look away. Because change doesn't always start with those in power, it begins with those who refuse to stay silent. So, the next time you see something wrong, when dignity is denied, when someone is made small, remember this story, and ask yourself, will I be the one who speaks, or the one who watches? Because the truth is clear now. Respect isn't earned by medals. It's owed by humanity. And silence. Silence is the soil where injustice grows. In the weeks that followed, the story of Colonel Marcus Lee and Private First Class Evan Mitchell continued to echo through every corner of the country. But it didn't just survive in headlines or social media, it rooted itself in something deeper: conscience. People who had never served in uniform found themselves reflecting on the values that the uniform stood for. Parents discussed the story with their children at the dinner table. College professors used it as a case study on ethics and responsibility. Small business owners taped newspaper clippings to their windows with words handwritten underneath. "We support our troops, always." The airline's response, meanwhile, was too little, too late. Public pressure mounted, and their apology, once vague and corporate, turned into a formal admission of failure. The employees involved were placed on indefinite leave. A federal investigation into airline discrimination policies began, and the Department of Transportation quietly rolled out new guidelines ensuring military escorts receive immediate boarding priority across all U.S. carriers. But beyond policy and punishment, something more powerful had happened. A culture had been challenged. It was no longer enough to say, "Support our troops," on bumper stickers or during halftime performances. Americans had seen with their own eyes what it meant to fail a soldier in real time. Not with bullets, but with bureaucracy, not with malice, but with neglect, and they weren't willing to let it happen again. Marcus, meanwhile, returned to his post. No press tour, no interviews, just the quiet of duty. But something had changed even within him. He had seen how a single stand, even one taken with calm restraint, could awaken thousands. He had carried a young man home and, in doing so, carried a nation's conscience back to attention. He later received a handwritten letter from a 12-year-old boy in Ohio. It read, "Dear Colonel Lee, I saw your story on TV. I want to be brave like you one day. Not because you're a soldier, but because you didn't stay quiet when something was wrong. Thank you for showing us what right looks like." Marcus kept that letter in his desk drawer. Because of that, more than media coverage or outrage, was the legacy of that day. A reminder to the next generation that courage wears many forms, sometimes not in combat gear, but in the quiet refusal to let wrong go unchecked. This wasn't just a moment. It was a message. Dignity should never depend on a camera being present. Respect shouldn't require public pressure. And justice must never wait for hashtags to trend. So to those who watched, who shared, who spoke up, thank you. You didn't just make noise. You made the change. When one voice speaks, many others rise. What happened to Colonel Marcus Lee wasn't just about one airline, one flight, or even one fallen soldier. It was about something much bigger, a test of how we treat those who serve, how we uphold our values, and whether we stay silent in the face of quiet injustice. At that crowded terminal, people had a choice: look away, or speak up, and they chose to stand. Not because they were soldiers or officials, but because they were human. And that, more than anything, is what brought change. A 25-year-old college student with a livestream. A retired Marine who refused to stay quiet. Every mother, father, and traveler who raised their voice in that terminal reminded us of something simple but profound. Silence lets injustice grow, but courage, even in small moments, can shift the world. In our daily lives, we may never escort a fallen soldier or be put in front of a camera. But we will see wrong being done. We will hear voices being ignored. And in those moments, we are given the same choice: look away, or speak. Never underestimate what your voice can do. Because when one person stands up, they often find they were never standing alone. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever seen someone stand up for what's right when no one else would? Share your story, like, subscribe, and be part of a community that believes doing the right thing still matters.